How did I become an underwater archaeologist? How did I become an underwater archaeologist? All right, here's a common question that I get, and I understand the questioning there because it's weird, right? It's very specific, and it's not in your everyday listing of jobs. Now, my pathway to that was a bit odd. So first, I'm just going to lay out real briefly how a normal person becomes an underwater archaeologist, and then I'll talk about my path to that world. So in normal world, I a typical underwater archaeologist, if there is such thing, is somebody actually who largely focuses on historical archaeology because it's all about shipwrecks. You would get that. And this person is going to get a bachelor's in regular archaeology or even anthro. And during that bachelor's, they are going to focus on the underwater world, most likely focusing on historical classes and shipwreck stuff. And then they're going to go to grad school, and in grad school they'll really double down in that world of shipwrecks and the archaeological methods you use to like excavate or record these kind of things underwater. There are very few schools that do that, and they're usually in Texas or in Florida. There are a handful of others, but it's rare. It's rare. Now my pathway to that I kind of took the back door in. I'm really happy with how it worked out, but it was not, there was no flow chart for this one. So basically, really, I've always been a water person. My friends and family, they know that about me. You know, the big joke is how do you get, you know, Andrew out of the pool when I was a kid, right? I just always in the water. I was on the swim team for years and years. I always really enjoyed that. And then in college, I kind of parlayed the swim team stuff into surfing and snorkeling a ton, and then ultimately into scuba diving. And I actually got my regular open water scuba certification in college. I think it was maybe my 4th year in college or something like this. Now, I was really lucky. I went to UC Santa Barbara, and that's on the coast. So there were local dive shops that would work with UCSB to offer scuba diving classes. So I'm lucky in that little bit. But while I'm doing that, at the same time, I'm taking archaeology classes, right? And I'm getting a bachelor's in archaeology. Now, I did not focus on underwater archaeology whatsoever. There was no focus. There were no underwater archaeology classes at UCSB, right? I learned archaeology and I was learning diving, and they were like two different worlds. Now, there are aspects of what I did that worked really well. I highly recommend. I just want to be sure almost that those of you who are into underwater archaeology take your first field school on an on-ground site. You want to learn archaeology the old school way. On ground, this is how to dig a 1x1 at this site. This is how to map a site using a compass on ground. Why? Because underwater, everything is 10 times more difficult and 10 times slower. You know, so you want to get that knowledge on ground and then parlay it into the underwater world, because you'll know what you're doing underwater, basically. So I think that worked really well for me, and I think most underwater professionals would agree. So after I got my bachelor's degree and I continued to go on archaeological projects, I was always like, had my radar out for any kind of underwater situation. And on the project I ended up going on for my master's degree in the Valley of Peace in Belize, we happen to have 25 cenotes in our survey area. These are mini lakes in the middle of the jungle. Some of them as deep as 250 feet, this kind of thing. So when I saw those on the map, I'm like, there. And I made a deal with the project director, with Lisa, and she was totally cool with it. I'm like, that's where I want to focus, right, for my degrees. Now, I'm like, you know what? I maybe need to become a better diver. So while I was working on the cenotes summer by summer, I was also back at home getting higher end scuba certifications. And how that goes is I got my advanced open water, um, which I highly recommend anyone take. That class was fun. I actually ended up getting that in Mexico in the Maya area while on an archaeological project. That was it's really great to be able to do all that together. I don't expect everyone to have that kind of luck and good fortune. After that, I also got my cavern diver specialty after I got my advanced open water. Cavern diver is the first step to cave diving. Now, am I a certified cave diver? No. Am I okay with that? Totally. Now, I have done cave diving. I did it as part of the cavern diving class, right? So I learned the stuff like laying the line, feeling around in a silt out, feeling for the arrow that you put on the line that always points out, these kinds of things. I learned that skill set, but I am not okay to go into full overhead environment, and I'm fine with that. I did cave diving again legally, but it is, I'm telling you guys, it is extremely dangerous. It just is. It's just dangerous. So i'm I'm a happy person. I'm not like in need of danger person. So I don't need that in my career now. If I needed to for some reason and I needed to get the skill set to do it once, maybe, but it's not me. But the cavern thing was great because it okayed me to deal in sort of a partially uh, overhead environment. What that means is if you have the cenote, the pool of water going straight down, and you have uh, sort of the underwater world angled in a little bit, I can go under there. It's basically as long as I can still see light. I'm okayed for that. So I got that. And that was pretty involved. After that, and we're kind of going year by year, summer by summer, I got my rescue diving certification, which I actually found for me was really easy because I'm a water person. I was a pool lifeguard for years in college. It was a great college job on campus. So I knew all that CPR stuff and all that, so the rescue diving thing was easy and enjoyable. But then finally, and this was quite a few years in, there were summers where I didn't get higher end scuba certifications. Finally, about 5 years ago or so, 6 years, I got my dive master certification. Now that's a thing. All the previous certifications are like, oh, okay, 2 weeks, couple weekends, you're good. Dive master, you want to think of it as like a semester of work. There's like, I forget how many, 12 or 14 different modules. It's kind of each week. You have things to learn, things to read, and dives to do. It's a lot. But it was just super satisfying when I finished that. Shout out to Steve Millington at LA Scuba. Steve, the best dive teacher I have ever had. But that was big. It was like finishing a degree, right? The dive master thing. And so with dive master, you really know some stuff, and so I feel comfortable running an underwater project in a middle of nowhere in Belize, right? Because there are real dangers there. So that's how I came to it. It's this funny two-world thing that sort of came together. And there are aspects that I really like about the way that I learned this because I sort of have a kind of a fresh slate sometimes when I look at this. And I feel like I can come in with kind of a slightly different angle. And because I'm a prehistoric underwater archaeologist, which is kind of rare, when I go to meetings, it tends to be the underwater stuff is a lot of people talking about shipwrecks, and then I come in and talk about cenotes, and there's Maya pyramids and stuff, and that works well for me. It makes me look good in that world, and I'm interested in hearing about the shipwrecks, because I don't do that. So I've really enjoyed that part of my career. Now, all my degrees are regular, right? My master's, my PhD. There is no underwater component to the degree. So if you get into this, realize that's how it goes. I'm almost lying to you guys. I'm almost a fraud calling myself an underwater archaeologist. It's honestly more true to call myself an archaeologist who happens to work underwater, if that makes sense. So for you guys getting into it, just listen to what I said at the top of this. Think about my own story and realize that underwater archaeology is a very, very small world. And you have to be really, really focused on what you want to do, what area of the world you want to go work in, where you want to go to school for it, and realize it's so small that for most of the time, it's very, very hard to have a full-time job as an underwater archaeologist. It's out there, but it's really rare. So get the skill set for on ground, huh? You might be able to parlay that a little better to a job where you make money. And then you get to do underwater on the side when the moment calls for it. Finally, I would say that in the underwater archaeology world, here, I'm going to serve you a cliche. Here it comes. Cliche. You just want to be a lifelong learner. So you want to keep learning, both in, of course, in archaeology, but in scuba diving as well. Like, I continue to take classes every so often. I've taken some classes in GUE, Global Underwater Explorers, and I've also done a local reef check class where you go out and count the fish. I found that both of those to be very, very worthwhile, because when we think of it in the end, underwater archaeology is sort of an odd duck. So anything that you can add to it, even new methods that you can come up with in order to deal with artifacts and sites underwater, is only a good thing.